Hello and welcome to this week's program to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Each week we connect with and hear from fascinating and inspirational speakers, often with a message focused on our interests in innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. As a Rotary Club, we look for ways for these programs might foster new approaches to improving communities near and far. We're glad you've joined us, and we hope that you'll enjoy exploring how technology can serve the business of service to others. Today, I'll have Rushton introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Robert Dillon.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And it is a pleasure to introduce Bob, not just because he's Bob Dillon, right? But because he's one of these fun people who, it's great to hang out with, good conversations, and, kind of lots of shared interests in terms of making schools better places. Bob is someone who has done loads of things, kind of Renaissance in a way. So he's an author, he's a school leader, he is an educator, and speaks to people all over the world about innovation in learning spaces and working spaces. He's been honored by a lot of different organizations, Common Sense Media, the dSchool at Stanford, a number of other cool places that we'll make sure to include. You may have just read before you joined us with this. But with that said, let's hand it over. Bob, thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and what a fun thing. Rushton introduced me to this idea of the E-Rotary Club, too. So I've lived here in the St. Louis area for the last 40 plus years, and certainly know the mission of Rotary to serve, and that's deep in my heart, too. I think from my grandfather to my father, it's been passed on that that's our role in life, is to serve others and to try to make the world a better place when we leave, and love that we can now interconnect technology and service, something that probably decades ago was a lot harder than it is today. But really, I want to chat a little bit about space, and not the NASA space, the other space, the things that surround us on a daily basis. I've been spending the last chunk of years not only working as a public school educator, as Rushton said, but working as someone that is slowing down to notice our environment around us and how it affects us. And that's taken me to schools and districts, churches and workplaces, nonprofits and profitable companies all over the country. And really an opportunity just to really get people to be intentional around that work. And so let me share a little bit about what that looks like and just kind of my major ideas for the day. So first and foremost, really is this belief, this deep belief that space is never neutral. This idea that no matter where we are, it is impacting us either in a positive way or a negative way. And I think we've all been in workplaces and spaces where we're like, oh, this is gross, this is awful, get me out of here. And places that have felt like they've been truly inspirational for folks as they go through what's going on. And my role is to work side by side with people to try to make sure that space is a positive force in the work. And I think this goes well beyond kind of Google's exciting, we've got a slide and we've got a ping pong table. It really goes to a bunch of micro decisions that we kind of make as we kind of walk through what's going on there. And so really, in my mind, it really has to do with three things that I think are more important than ever in our world. One is that we want healthy human beings that surround us in what we're doing. I think that work stress, work anxiety, burnout cross over just about every field. And we know that we're in a day and place where stress and anxiety is limiting the impact that people are having on their daily basis. So how can we allow space to not just be neutral or detrimental, to be optimizing us as humans? The second is, I live in a beautiful world filled with amazing ideas and solutions. And I want every place that people exist as humans, from their front porch to their walk around the neighborhood to Starbucks to time in the car, to be idea rich, because I think as humans, that's one of the things that separates us. And so I'm looking to do that in both schools and workplaces around the country. And then finally, this piece about connection. We were never designed to be isolated individuals. Whether it's connecting like this in the E-Rotary, or it's connecting with people in a workplace, or it's saying, hey, at this moment in time, I need to disconnect. How are we bringing that to our workplaces? And so I think sometimes when people think about this, they think about, oh, you know, I'm a little cog in a big wheel of a big organization. How do I do something about this work? And I think we forget that micro design is just as important as macro design. And we can make impact on our individual space, even if that's a 6-foot radius. You know, you've been in a class where they're like, put your arms out and swing your arms. If there's somebody that close, that's the space I'm talking about, is that stuff that you can control. You could throw things away, you can add to, and we'll talk a little bit about some really specific things around micro design and individual spaces that can not only help you, but can also inspire others around you. Because we've been in these places, we've walked in like, hey, that's really cool with what you did. I want to do that as well. But the other piece is that we have communal space. And I think that all of us are now working in more places than ever. I think my father and my grandfather worked in one place. They drove there, they got out of their car, they went into one place, they worked. And, you know, at the end of the day, it reminds me of the old, you know, the wolf and the fox cartoon or whatever it was, where they clocked in and clocked out, and where they were mad at each other all day and they clocked out and they went home. But the communal space has changed. My communal space might be the sports bar where I'm having lunch and I'm working. It might mean in my car. It might mean that I'm in a hotel room. It might, whatever it is. I think we have a lot of those types of spaces that, if we're more intentional, can again make us better human beings, give us more ideas, and give us a sense of connection and not being kind of lonely in the world out there. So really want to kind of mention these 4 elements, because I think these are the 4 eyes of what we're talking about with space design. And these are the ones that I talk with companies and corporations and schools and districts. Is number 1, we want to be inclusive. We want to make sure that all the people that are in that space, and that word can be jargon. I get that when we talk about inclusivity, but now we're not going to talk about the jargon piece of that. We want space to be inspirational. It doesn't mean that there are going to be fancy quotes on the wall and you're going to walk in and like, oh, thank goodness that fancy quote was there, because now I'm inspired to do my workday. But we'll talk about what that means. A little piece here about things being interesting, right? Like the numbness of normalcy is what sometimes drives down our productivity. So I think that our workspaces have to have some level of interest, and I'm going to talk about that. And then all the way back around to this level of intentionality. And I really think the key to intentionality is taking time to slow down and notice. And we'll talk a little bit about that. One of my favorite books from the summer was The Art of Noticing. It was like 131 ways to notice, but it was one of those books where I read it nice and slow because I didn't want it to end. It was that good because it gave me so many ideas on how to do the 4th element that's there. So when it talks about inclusivity, really thinking about neurodiversity, and this has been an interesting term for me, not only in the school world, but in the work world, where we have people that have different brains that work in different ways at different times of the day. And I wonder, how are we supporting all in our spaces when it comes to neurodiversity? I read an article recently about the piece about folks on the autism spectrum, and are we building our work environments to make sure that we're getting the most from those folks that have so much to offer workplaces? And sometimes this means that there needs to be process space and quiet space and norming and those sort of things. But have we even raised the question of neurodiversity and space design in our workplaces? I think it's an important question to go at. Number 2 is about accessibility. And I would just say accessibility goes well beyond physical accessibility. And that's why I put accessibility plus. It's about mental accessibility as well. I think that all of us want to be in the flow, want to work with others, but oftentimes what we bring to the table with our mental strengths are often impacted negatively by the work environments around us. And then in education, we have a whole thing called universal design for learning. And that's not just education term, but like there's some amazing things there that if I was helping to design your workplace or working side by side with you, we'd be talking about neurodiversity, accessibility when it comes to mental and intellectual accessibility, and then these ideas around universal design for learning. When we talk about inspirational, I could make a list of 15. There could be 15 things here that go on and on and on. But the first for me is art. I think that humans are inspired by beauty and art. And I think that workplaces not only need to have beautiful pieces of art in them, but they also need to be the types of art that continue to inspire. Because even we've been to places, there's artwork on the walls and we forgot what it looks like. If I asked you, I'll pay you $100 to draw the piece of art in your workplace, you would be like, I don't have any idea. I walk past it every day. So we need to pick out things that'll continue to inspire folks and folks to stop, notice, and just see the beauty in that. The next one is about light. And learning more and more, and I don't know if anybody else has dove into this idea about how light supports our circadian rhythms throughout the day, and that there are different tones of light that play a role in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. And so how can we be intentional about the light we have? And I know that all of us can't control all of these things, but if we're aware of them, if we're having conversations about them, it puts us all on a journey for that micro and macro design. And the last one there is, do we balance our green time with our screen time? And I know that's a big deal in California, certainly, as folks getting outside, a very active state in general. But like, it's really important that we pull ourselves away from our screens and smell the roses as it goes for inspiration. In the area of interesting, I have three things, and I talk about, do micro spaces, meaning your office or your organization, have the right amount of need to have things. I'm in way too many places that have so many things that are unneeded, that just need to be thrown away, and someone needs permission to do that. The idea of having nice to have things, these are the things that it's really nice to be able to walk over and get a cup of coffee. It's really nice to be able to go over and know where something is, like a communal supply. But all of these things matter deeply when you're trying to build great humans, inspire ideas, and continue to get people to connect. If there's friction in the system, then you don't have all the nice to have things that you should. And then finally, what do you have that's neat to have? I recently bought a drone for our school, not because I have any idea how that plays into some curriculum or standards, but I was like, you know what? That's kind of cool, and we need to have some cool things here. So could that be a jelly bean machine? Could that be a drone? I mean, I think that there's some value in saying, like, we have something different than everyone else here. And so what is that for your workspace? And then finally, about intentionality, going back to, how are we asking questions about everything in our space? Why does this help? Why does this need to be here? Why do we make a choice around this? Trying to find fresh perspective. Sometimes that's about sitting on the floor, standing on a ladder, just to see the space differently. And then continuing to realize that all of the little details of every workspace, school space, need to be missional. The pencils you buy can be missional. The signs you put up can be missional. The fonts you can use can be missional. I think all of those things play a huge role in what's going on. So with all of that said, why should we let space dictate our tempo, our rhythm, and our mood on a daily basis? So there's my thoughts. No space is neutral. We have a lot of control. And ultimately, I think that as more people think about these things, there will be very rich conversation about how to improve the workplace or workplaces for all human beings, so we're all healthier and happier and inspiring amazing ideas. That's what I have for us today. Just a few ideas, right? Just a few random ideas on space. What's everybody think about that?
Great. Well, thank you very much. I find it very interesting, and I certainly came up with a lot of questions that I want to know. But I want to first take a moment to just introduce the members that we have on the phone, on the video today, and if they could just wave as we go through them. We have Sandy maybe twice, I think, there. We have John. Hello. John, Rushton, and Shags as well. Does anybody have a first question? Go ahead, Rushton.
Bob, totally cool to have you on. Thanks again. And when you think about innovative learning spaces in schools, you've seen a lot of different places that inspired you to think about cool possibilities for learning. What are some spaces you've seen? Describe those that made you go, wow, see, that's amazing.
Yeah, it often is when you realize space has been shaped by the students, right? Like there's a deep commitment by an organization to the people that learn or grow there are deeply at the heart of that. I can turn to a student and say like, hey, why is this over here? They're like, oh, whoa. Well, we put the green couch over there because it helped with the color palette in that space. And the one we had there before was kind of old. And this is really like when people can speak deeply about the design, that's super inspiring. But the actual physical space itself, I have been working with a school that's an 80,000 square foot old factory that they've converted into an amazing school. And that's been fun to watch them really tackle these really large spaces and have a lot of the elements that we talked about here today.
Interesting. Now, you come from a teaching background, is that correct?
Correct.
So how did you get, I guess, from just the teaching to the thinking of how to make it better by thinking about the space and what you presented to us today?
Yeah, interesting. I was a middle school principal for a long period of time at what they call an expeditionary learning school. So that means we are either outside, out in the community, or outside of the community about 20% of the school year. So it's an amazing way for middle school kids to learn. And there's all of these schools around the country. They're called EL schools. And it was amazing. But I saw kids that were checked out in the normal classroom in the normal school day get totally jazzed about doing service, being in the community, being in green space. And I said, classrooms are never going to be like that, but how do we at least bridge the gap? And I think that was the start for me. And then I've just been a student of the work. My co-author is an industrial designer, so she definitely knows the design elements better than I. But the organizational change pieces and being able to identify best practices and transfer them from place to place. And now the really cool thing is my work is now taking me, like I said, to nonprofits and to libraries and to churches talking about their space, because it's the same stuff, right? We want a space to inspire and get people pumped up and get it be a place where people want to be. And so it's been fun to kind of make that crossover as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? No? I find it, Rushton, did you say, okay, Sandy, go ahead.
I guess my question has to do with, is it more about like what's in the room versus how much? Because I know there's a lot of talk now about like kind of minimalism is in. So the less clutter you have, that's a better environment to be in.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be had, and like all these trends that usually yanks us too far to one side, right? Like, and so Maria Kondo, right? Like we're talking about, does this bring you joy? There is some great, what I love about that question is it slows us down and it makes us consider something. So most places have too much stuff, whether people don't have permission to get rid of it, whether it accumulates over time. I think humans are natural hoarders. But both the volume and the quality matter, right? And so I would say it's both. But we can't oftentimes re-envision a space when everything is already in it. So I do think it's addition by subtraction first before we tune back to what the quality pieces should be. So sometimes it's about quantity out before we figure out what quality is in most of the places I work.
Okay. And then I guess I have another question too. And do you think it's like, does it make a difference if what you have is more personal? Because like you can go to some places that, you know, are just like really over the top in what quality of stuff they have, but it feels very sterile or very unwelcoming. And then you can go someplace else and, you know, it's all really personal stuff to that person and it feels so welcoming and homey and, you know, happy and.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is that oftentimes people forget that human beings need to feel comfortable in their space. Oftentimes it's about, is it beautiful versus is it comfortable? And sometimes those are two different things. Really, we talk about a continuum, right? You want to care for people in their space. You want people to be comfortable in their space. Then you want the work to be promoted in that space. And then hopefully at the very top of that is some sort of strategic priority, right? But I think it's all of those. But if people feel like the corporate cleanliness is something that makes me not want to be there every day, then the pendulum's off again, right? But what it comes down to is oftentimes decisions are made, and those are 5-year decisions when they probably should be 5-week or 5-month decisions. And people should be asking each other all the time, what's not working for us? What's working for us? How do we make changes in real time and not get stuck? And so that's what I love about flexible, mobile kind of workplaces. Not that they're open and not that they're noisy, but that they have an opportunity to transform quite quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, Bob, when we think about spaces and especially workspaces here in Silicon Valley, I mean, there's very much kind of a cultural element to it, right? You know, people talk about, you know, what they imagine or have seen at places like Google and Facebook, et cetera, right? But as you've encountered different cultural spaces, maybe other countries, have people brought ideas to you that kind of come from their space, their community space, that led you kind of in new directions on how you think about innovative space?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. I think that there are some pieces there. You know, a lot of the research around learning space design actually comes from the work at University of Melbourne. And one of the pieces that they've had to bring into a lot of their schools in both Australia and New Zealand are how do the cultures of First Nations people in both Australia and New Zealand roll in, everything from language to art to color. And so I think that folks that want to build that inclusivity certainly need to build a sense that the art is inclusive and the colors are inclusive. Now you can go over the top and this can be a never-ending kind of dive bomb until the end. But if you're not having that conversation about like, what is our culture? What is the tradition of our culture around here? Hey, welcome, Kitty. You're right. I think you're missing out on a good conversation to enhance a space. And we're certainly having that at schools for sure when it comes to how do we make sure that all of our kids feel like they, who they are is in that space.
Very cool. I know that that for a lot of kids, just seeing something that they don't expect in a classroom, we talk about classroom walls being too cluttered and how that can be counterproductive for kids, but just a point of identification, right? So maybe a cat, maybe a student really likes cats, and there's a picture of a cat, like hanging out, and suddenly it's like, wait, suddenly they feel differently about the space.
Yeah, and we have a lot to learn both in the workplace and from schools, from museums, right? Museums do this really well. Like they hold our attention, they slow us down, they inspire us, they provide us beauty. There's a cleanliness to those spaces. There's a coherence to those spaces. And so if I was trying to help move some folks along in this work, one of the first things we might do is like, let's go to the local museum and see what we can learn from them.
Great. Any other questions? No, I appreciate it, Bob. I actually thought about, you were describing as I'm in the IT space and moving our clients from a long-term waterfall thinking. You actually it's like you just described the agile methodology of furniture and the space, and that is, I really quite appreciate that, because as my company grows, we're in a WeWork space, so it's never the same very, very often. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think that many of our schools will feel like we learn because I think they'll be inspired by some sort of WeWork type of environment, because there's a lot to be said around flexibility and growth and inspirational and lateral capacity building of different people in the space. And so I think we're going to see a number of these types of kind of we learn spaces, whether they're for after school. And I already work with a group in Chicago that are doing that type of things where kids can go between 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. and kind of have this kind of we learn, very high design, kind of cool space to be in, lots of different ideas. And I think that'll continue to grow.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. if that's everybody's questions, I will lead us towards the end. As always, we would like everyone to encourage everyone who's enjoyed this program to let us know what you think. Below, you'll find our Discuss tool for sharing and responding to comments. Please take a moment to add to the conversation. And members and Rotarian guests, make sure you fill out the attendance section too. It helps us know about the reach of our efforts and also serves as a makeup for a missed meeting. If you put your email address below, you'll get a message that you can pass along to your club secretary. As always, we'd like to give the final word to our speaker. So back to you.
Well, thanks for having me, and it was a great opportunity to kind of keep spreading the gospel around space, right? I think it's a really important piece, and you know, all of us need to continue to learn where we do what best, and I think that's part of the mission of this work around space. Thanks again.